today's explainer. We're diving straight into a massive, honestly pretty painful paradox that almost every leader, manager, and professional is facing right now. Think about it for a second. We have more communication tools at our fingertips today than at any other point in human history, right? I mean, emails, direct messages, project management apps, constant video calls, the sheer volume of our communication channels is just staggering. And yet, if we look at the work of management thinker Peter Drucker, it turns out actual meaningful communication is becoming as elusive as a unicorn. The noise level in our organizations has risen so fast that we're all kind of drowning in chatter, but very few of us are actually being heard. So, today, we're going to break down Drucker's rules to figure out exactly why your team can't hear you, and, much more importantly, how we're going to fix it.
To understand where we're going wrong, we actually have to start with a classic old riddle. It's a question posed by mystics across tons of different cultures. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, is there a sound? I want you to genuinely consider your answer to that for a second. Think about the physics of it, think about the philosophy of it. What do you say? Because Peter Drucker's absolutely counterintuitive perspective on this exact question completely changes how we should approach speaking to our teams.
The answer, according to Drucker, it is a resounding no. Now, hold on, I know exactly what you're thinking. Yes, when the tree falls, it creates sound waves. There's physical energy displacing the air. But, and this is the absolute crux of the whole matter, there is literally no sound until someone or something actually perceives it. Sound is the act of perception. Without an ear to process those waves, you just have silent, invisible energy.
So the crucial point is this. Communication is achieved entirely by the receiver. The sender, that's you, the manager, the leader, you don't actually communicate. You merely utter. Let that sink in. If you tell your team something incredibly important 3 times, perfectly clearly, and they don't receive it, you didn't communicate. You just made noise in the forest. You created sound waves, but absolutely no sound. If we want to actually connect, we have to stop focusing so much on what we're saying and start intensely focusing on what the other person is receiving. Drucker breaks this down into 3 fundamental truths.
Okay, let's dive into this. Drucker's first truth: perception.
Because communication is perception, you can't just beam your thoughts directly into someone else's brain. Your message has to pass through the filter of their senses, their background, their whole understanding of the world. To be understood, your concepts have to be grounded entirely in the receiver's experience. Socrates actually hit the nail on the head with this over 2,500 years ago. He noted that if you want to speak to carpenters, you have to use carpenter metaphors. You can only communicate in the receiver's language, using their terminology. If you try to explain some brilliant new corporate strategy using terms that just aren't part of your team's daily reality, they literally cannot perceive it. It just bounces right off them.
To really lock this concept in, think about the classic story of the blind men and the elephant. Imagine a group of blind men encountering an elephant for the very first time. The guy who steps forward and touches the elephant's leg feels something thick, rough, and sturdy. So he forms a very specific, limited perception of truth. To him, an elephant is exactly like a tree trunk. That is his absolute reality based on his specific point of contact.
But then, look at his companions. Another guy touches the trunk and is convinced the elephant is like a giant snake. Another touches the broad, rough skin of the side and believes, for sure, the elephant is like a wall. Every single one of them will stubbornly report completely different realities. And the thing is, they aren't lying. They're accurately reporting their perception. But none of them are seeing the whole picture. And worse, none of them can understand what the other guys are even talking about.
And this brings us to Drucker's fascinating takeaway from this old parable. This isn't just a funny story. It's the human condition. There is absolutely no communication until the one who touched the skin physically walks over to the one who touched the leg and touches the leg himself. As a manager, you can't just stand at the skin and yell at the guy holding the leg that he's wrong. You have to step into your team's perception range. You got to see the work from their perspective before you can ever hope to be heard.
Let's move right along to the second truth and see how this builds on perception. Second truth, expectation. Here's a wild fact about how our minds work. Human beings generally only perceive, see, and hear what they already expect to perceive, see, and hear. Our brains are incredibly efficient, but that efficiency makes us terribly biased listeners. We crave continuity. So what happens when we hear something totally unexpected? Well, the human mind doesn't just put up a little resistance to unexpected information, it actually completely ignores it. Or worse, it misreads it and twists it into something it did expect to hear. If you calmly tell your team that the project is completely changing direction, but they fully expect everything to stay the same, they'll probably just nod,
filter out the change, and keep doing exactly what they were doing yesterday. They literally didn't hear the unexpected part.
So how in the world do you break through that? You need a shock. To break through the expected continuity of, say, a normal Tuesday morning, a manager has to deliver a shock to the system. You have to clearly, emphatically signal, stop. This is different. What I'm about to say is absolutely not what you expect. You basically have to jolt the listener out of their predictive autopilot so they actually open their ears to something new.
Which brings us to the final rule. Third truth, demand. Whenever you're genuinely communicating, you're basically asking the receiver to become something, to do something, or to believe something. It is a demand. You're always addressing their motivation. It's never purely passive. And because it's a demand, it lives or dies by how it interacts with the receiver's values. If your message perfectly fits your team members' aspirations, goals, and values, it becomes incredibly powerful. It acts like a catalyst. But if your demand goes against their values or what they truly care about, it'll be entirely rejected. They'll resist it, ignore it, or straight up fight it. You simply cannot communicate a demand that fundamentally clashes with the receiver's core motivations.
And this brilliantly illustrates Drucker's ultimate distinction between information and communication. They're actually completely different things. In fact, they're almost opposites. Information is formal, it's logical, it's just data. But on its own, it's totally devoid of human meaning. Communication, on the other hand, is perception. It's messy, it's human, it's deeply tied to expectations and values. You know, you can flood your team with an endless stream of logical information, spreadsheets, reports, perfectly formatted emails, without actually communicating a single thing. So how do we put all of this into practice? We need to ask ourselves 3 questions before speaking.
We have to fundamentally shift our mindset from this sender-centric focus of how do I say this eloquently to a fiercely receiver-centric mindset. Drucker leaves us with this awesome, actionable framework. Here are the 3 mandatory questions every single leader must vigorously ask themselves before their next crucial team conversation. Number 1, can the receiver even receive this? Like, is my message actually grounded in their daily experience and vocabulary? Number 2, what do they expect to hear right now? And if my message is different from that expectation, do I have a shock prepared to break through their mental filters? And number 3, does this message fit what they actually care about? Does it align with their values and motivations? Honestly, if you skip these questions, you're just flying blind.
We've covered a ton of ground today, but if you take away only one thing from this explainer, let it be this provocative thought. You don't communicate, the listener does. So I want to challenge you right now. Think about the last time you felt super frustrated because your team just didn't listen. Be honest with yourself. Were you truly communicating, ensuring your message matched their perception, expectation, and values? Or were you just making noise in the forest, merely uttering to an empty room? Keep that question in mind before you hit send on your next email. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.